On today's episode of the Black Studies Podcast, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Nikki Brown, Associate Professor of History and African American and Africana Studies at the University of Kentucky. She works on race, representation, and African American history of the 19th and 20th centuries. Dr. Brown is working on several projects currently: a manuscript on the photographs of the Louisiana Civil Rights Movement, 2 digital archives documenting racial violence in Kentucky 1880 to 1950, and Cataloguing Jim Crow in Kentucky, and a translation of the memoir of Afro-Turkish political leader Mustafa Olpak in conjunction with online oral history project of the Afro Turks. The last project on the Afro Turks won a summer stipend grant from the National Endowment of the Humanities. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Nikki Brown, Associate Professor of History and of African American and Africana Studies at the University of Kentucky. How are you doing today, Dr. Brown?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. The World Cup is fascinating to me, and I was up last night watching Germany lose. Germany lost to Paraguay. Oh yeah, the Netherlands lost to, who did they lose to? Morocco. Both the Netherlands and Germany lost in the penalty kick round. And yes. So I'm really happy to have that type of to still be involved in sports in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting to see not only just all the excitement around it, but the conversations that are happening around who's losing and who's winning. And I know my daughter has been begging me to try to get her to a game, which I don't think is going to happen at this point, but
right.
We'll see. I will keep watching.
I'm going to say that just to sort of jump right into Black Studies, Trevor Noah gave a Black Studies kind of vision or look at the World Cup. And again, it's one of those things that Black Studies does so well, which is that it points out the obvious, even though the obvious is not something that we can directly see. And I think I'm paraphrasing him, but he said, when you look at countries like France will say that it won the World Cup, or England will say, or the Netherlands will say that they won the World Cup. But if you look at, particularly France, if you look at who the players are, the players are African. Either they were born in France, but have African parents, or they are actually African in the sense that they migrated to France later. And he said, that by changing the focus, you can say that African countries have won the World Cup many times. But we just don't it's the players that win the World Cup, not the country. And I thought that's a real Black Studies approach to take to something, but it's obvious that and perhaps it's even for good or for bad, that is something. Well, it's so easy to overlook Black labor, and just for a country to kind of claim Black labor as its own. And I'm not saying that the men aren't being remunerated. I'm not saying they're not being compensated. They do fine. But again, Kylian Mbappe, his parents are, I don't think that they were French citizens, but that's something that we'll have to look up. I mean, he represents many, many worlds. Yeah. I'm an American player. He claims 3 nationalities, and that is that his mother was heavily pregnant. I think he's from Nigeria. My parents are from Nigeria. His mother was heavily pregnant. She was in the United States. The parents were about to get on a plane and fly to England, and the plane and the airline said, absolutely not. You're like 8 months pregnant. So he is born in the United States, and they stayed in the United States until he was 2 months old enough to fly. And then they flew to England, and that's where he grew up, and that's where he plays professional soccer. So he has like 3 different nationalities, but he claimed the United States as his country of birth, so that he could play for the American team in the World Cup. And I think that is a real that also speaks to the transnational nature of Black Studies.
Absolutely. So let's just continue.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. I'm gonna have to look that up. But no, we're in the middle of a conversation, so I'm gonna try not to get distracted by that. But yeah.
So,
Oh, but go
how
ahead.
did you get into Black studies, and what keeps you committed to doing that work?
That is a really great question, and I was listening to some previous podcasts, and I was really struck by how all the different ways in which people had had come to Black studies. I think my path is probably the path that many of your guests have made, but I do want to make it my own, and that is that. I like to think of my family as like a Black studies family. If not, if you could, I think at a long time, I referred to them as a Black nationalist family. But I think, and if they're not Black nationalists, they are most definitely Black studies family. Um, so but I also think that my parents were kind of like a part of a generation of Black studies, or part of a generation of people who were um the 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 foot soldiers of the civil rights movement, meaning they took a lot of the goals of civil rights and Black power, and they tried to enact them on a local level. And I think that that's a really important story. So just to say that my dad fought in Vietnam, and after he left, he used the GI Bill to go to university, the Western New England University, which is in Springfield, Massachusetts, where I was born. And he became a lawyer, and he became a legal aid lawyer, and then he became a sort of a defense attorney. And my mom, her parents were deaf, and she was born in D.C. because they were part of the Great Migration as well. My dad's parents migrated from rural Georgia to Springfield, Massachusetts during World War II, and my mom's parents actually migrated from rural North Carolina to Washington D.C. also during World War II, or shortly before. And my mom's parents were deaf, and she got involved in sort of deaf education and special education, and then she became a city council person. So and then they met in Quantico, Virginia, and but they sort of took these ideas about what they saw in the civil rights movement, and they really did try to enact it in Rochester, New York. So I have an older brother, Scott Brown, who is a professor of African American studies, and I have a younger sister, Kimberly Brown, who is also an educator, and I think teaches a lot of Black studies in her classes. And so I just remember as a child, really, literally, like sitting around the dinner table, and my dad sort of bringing up an issue. Like this is in the 1980s, and this is Reagan, and he would say, how is this going to affect Black people? And he would slam his fist on the table, and then I was like, I don't know, but you know, like how is like the authorization of the Martin Luther King holiday, how is that going to affect Black people? And I was like, I'm going to get a day off from school, thumbs up. But I just have to say that it was just it was in the house. It was things that we talked about. And my mom, in big and small ways, just tried to, I think, took a very kind of Black equality, Black studies approach even to our education. So so we were raised in Rochester, New York, and that is the city of Frederick Douglass. And so she made a point to tell us, to keep us uh, conversant on Frederick Douglass's life and history. And but she also made sure that, again, on a personal level, that my brother and sister and I had access to the best education that Rochester provided at the time. So we uh, we are all um, graduates of Rochester Public Schools, and I'm very proud of that. But she also made sure that that we got the best, regardless of race. We got the best that Rochester Public Schools could offer. And so that was also, I think, kind of a Black studies approach. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, that was a long answer.
No, that was perfect.
Okay.
And I think that, like, it's 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 interesting to me, like, the intentionality behind public schools and then making sure that your kids get the best that it has to offer. That's something my
Right.
mother did too, in intentionally keeping us in the city school rather than going to one of the other, like, surrounding areas
That's right.
like
That's
many
right.
people did,
That's
and
right.
then making sure that the pushing and being there and making sure that the school district did what it was supposed to do and that we got what we could,
That's
uh,
right. That's right.
which there were fabulous teachers in the city schools, so that helped. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So we were always, or at least where in my education, I was always kind of surrounded by kids from the city of Rochester. This is in the 1970s and 80s when white flight was really underway, and so while I went to school with white children and black children and Latino children and Asian American children, I remember this very clearly. There's a very strong big population of Laotian Americans in Rochester. It's a very big population of Puerto Rican Americans in Rochester, along with African Americans and white Americans. So I really did go to this real sort of racial mixture. But I also want to point out that, in my mom's uh, advocacy for us, she was able to get us into a program called the Major Achievement Program, which is talented and gifted, and that was predominantly white.
Mhm.
So that was where that brings us back to the beginning, which is that I was educated in a multiracial public school system, but I also was on a very personal level. I was like really like so many of your guests, not all of them. Um and not to demean this at all, absolutely not. I was one of maybe one or two black children in the talented and gifted program. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that has I'm realizing has had a long impact, a deep impact on the way I think about education. That I'm still trying to wrestle with. Yeah. Yeah. But and because I think that so kind of racial breakdown is as you find it at the university level, particularly at Research One universities. Even at like, especially in places like the Honors College, you'll have like a classroom, like a class of 40 students, and most of them will be white. Most like 30 of them will be white. Five of them will be African American, and the other five will be Latino or Asian or indigenous. And it's yeah, yeah. So that's something that is still being perpetuated in higher education. Uh,
absolutely.
mhm.
So building on that, I wanna ask you how you situate yourself disciplinarily. You do have degrees in history, um, but the work that you do is more expansive than what the traditional discipline of history would be, obviously, and certainly intersects with and is a part of Black studies. So how do you situate yourself disciplinarily?
I think I'm a historian through and through, and I think as I was listening to um a previous guest talk about his journey to Black Studies. It really made me think about my journey to Black Studies, and it's been a long journey. But to answer your question, because I want to get it out of the way, and I mean not out of the way, but I want to be able to so to say that's an important question that helps ground me. I am a historian through and through, but I think in the last 20 years, especially since I lived in New Orleans, I've been making space for the rich material that other disciplines bring to my understanding of Black studies or my understanding of the Black experience, you know? In other words, for a long, long time, I just thought, that that history was one of the canonical disciplines in Black studies, because it was like, well, it's a story about the past, and everything happens in the past and so forth. And it wasn't really until actually really until I moved to a predominantly Black city like New Orleans. And it wasn't until I moved to Louisiana that I really came to understand Black studies, and I really came to understand what Jim Crow, racial segregation was. And so that's when I began to think that history is not the only way to tell this story. It's obviously it's very backward looking, but there are so many other disciplines that talk about us right now and also talk about us in the future. And that's when I began to really think, and even assign and read uh, different aspects or different disciplines in Black studies. Like, honestly, I began to really focus on photography as a document of the now, and I also began to really think about Afrofuturism as a way to think about the future. So, as a way in order to put Black people into the future, and what does that look like? So that's how I situate myself, even though I'm still very much looking into the past. I think the the longer answer really has to do with, again, going back to my high school education in Rochester and being in my AP American history class. And now that I think about it, I was probably like the only one of two sort of Black people in my AP American history class of maybe 20 or 20 students. And that's the way it was. I remember it was that's yeah, that's I don't think people gave a lot of thought to that until much later. But I remember anyway, I was in AP American history. And I remember thinking, we were talking about the American Revolution, and we're talking about, this is again, 1976 was the 100-year anniversary of the signing of the 200 years, right? Yeah, 200-year signing of the Declaration of Independence. So that was kind of in uh, uh, just sort of our mindset that we were at an important part in American history. And I would just remember thinking that slavery just wasn't that long ago. And I know, yeah, and slavery wasn't that long ago. And I remember thinking, if we're generous with slavery and start at 1700, even not, I mean, start at the year 1700. Of course, there was slavery before that, but I like to do the evenness of the numbers because it makes it easier. But I thought to myself, wait a minute, if we start at 1700 and we still have the original 13 colonies, and we go all the way through the 1865, that's 165 years of slavery. And then I thought, if you begin to think about Jim Crow, and again, being very generous with Jim Crow, I don't want to, it's say, let's start at 1880, because I want to be mindful of the Reconstruction period. But we start at 1880 and go to 1965 when the Voting Rights Act. I was thinking, you know what? That's 250 years of slavery and Jim Crow. And we've only been, I would just remember thinking about it. It's like, the Civil Rights Act was signed in 1965. That was like 20 years ago. I mean, in 1985, that was 20 years ago. And now it's what? Soon, it's 60 years ago. So I thought, we, we haven't been a country that kind of recognizes Black equality or racial equality. We're still very much in the shadow of slavery, and in the shadow of slavery, and we're still very much in the thick of Jim Crow. That's when I began to think, wait a minute, wait a minute. So we've had slavery and Jim Crow for much longer than we've been free. We've been an enslaved country and a racially segregated country for much, much longer. Uh, it will be, Ashley, it will not be in our lifetimes, in order to get parity, so that we've been a free country as long as we've been an enslaved and segregated country. It will take us into the 21st century. Are we in the 21st? It'll take us into the 22nd century. We will have to be at the year like 2025. Not 2025, 2125. I will long be dead. You will long be dead
Yeah.
before we even get to that level of parity. That's when I began to think, oh, this is much bigger. This is much longer than I even than I could even imagine. And I think uh, I took that sense of how do I say it? Not that sense of wonder, but that sense of critically think about the past, particularly through the lens of racism, and race and racism. How do we do that? I took that into college. I attended Oberlin College. A great experience. Loved it very much. Loved it very much. Still do. And I was able to. And I joined again at the encouragement of one of my advisors, one of my mentors, a white man. He nominated me for the Mellon Mays undergraduate fellowship, but back then it was called the Mellon Minority Undergraduate Fellowship. So I joined up with them in 1991, and then I went to then I had a great experience, still do, with the Mellon Mays program, and then I went to Yale afterwards, and I was still a historian, still like pumping the fist for history. That was a less positive experience, and we could do a whole podcast on that. But it was a less positive experience. And then I graduated from Yale, and my first job was at Kent State. Again, still in a history department, still 100%, 100% history. And then, because I have a sense of adventure, I took a job at Grambling State University, which is a historically Black college and university, as you know, in Louisiana. And I think that that was probably when I made the pivot from uh, history to Black studies. So that was relatively recent. Yeah. And when I moved to New Orleans in 2008, that pivot was underway. Yeah.
Was there something in particular about being at Grambling that made you make the pivot?
I think it was that. Yes, I think it was that I realized that I had a really limited understanding of what racial segregation was. Um, and an even more limited understanding of the impact of racial segregation. And I had to go there in many ways and see it with my own eyes and experience it, and experience the how do I say it? So experience the inequality,
Mm,
to see how uh, HBCUs came about in an environment of extreme economic and physical brutality. I had to see it with myself for me to say, "Oh, so this isn't just about history. It's about the way really, it's about the way people talk about history. It's about the way people remember history. It's about the literature that comes out of that era, and it's about the photography and the music and everything else that comes out of that era." I think I had gone I remember this. I had gone to Grambling, uh, just kind of thinking that black that racial segregation meant like an equal division between whites and blacks. You know, like black people had their school and white people had their school. Very much influenced, for good or for bad, mostly for bad, by a different world. You know, because that, of course, that's a contested terrain now. But I got to Grambling, and it was not a different world. I mean, it was a different world, but not like you saw on TV, not like I saw on TV. It really was. It really was a case study on how Black people have been making $1 out of 15 cents for a century. And just up the street, Louisiana Tech uh, was getting all of the state money, was getting most of the state money, was getting or Louisiana State University is better. It was getting most of the state the money set aside by the state, and whatever was left was given to the white universities and then to the Black universities, and how Black universities were still able to thrive and still able to put out um, for 4 centuries, people who were for 100 years were able to put out uh, uh, high quality educators, scientists, lawyers, etc. I'm talking about Grambling and Southern. Southern
Mhm.
University, how they were able to do it under such challenging and really under such challenging circumstances. That's how I think, or another way to say it um, is that I remember as one of my colleagues at the University of New Orleans, where I went to after Grambling, one of my colleagues, Joe Caldwell, who has since passed, but Joe Caldwell was from African American man. He taught at UNO, but he was from Northern Louisiana, and this is what I mean, sort of like the living history. He was telling me over lunch one day how he could remember it being the 1950s, and if a black man in Northern Louisiana tried to take a sip of water from a white water fountain, he would have a brick upside his head. Like, people like that type of those racial hierarchies and that level of racial separation was brutally enforced. And that's when really came to fully understand that history is not the only way to record that level of brutal enforcement. That there are other ways to record it, and more so, history is not the only way to record Black resistance to those very challenging circumstances. That there are other ways to do it. So that's how I began to think differently about Black studies and become more appreciative of it.
Well, thank you. I think that leads into the next question I wanna ask, but I do wanna ask about how that has influenced the projects that you're working on. And you got some digital archives, you've got photography, you've got an oral history project, like, how is
Yeah.
that?
How did I guess somebody's gonna have to sort of point out the threads. I think it's that wherever I've gone, I've always been interested in that question that my dad would ask at the dinner table. How does this affect Black people? you know, so of course, I mean, I'm at a Grambling, and I'm like, how does racial segregation affect Black people? I mean, really, but that's too big a project. It really is. It's too big. But or at least it was too big for me to conceive at the time. So I really began to get interested in, um, like, sort of day to day stuff, like day to day interactions between whites and Blacks. I remember while I was at Grambling, my first year at Grambling, I applied for a Louisiana Endowment of the Humanities grant to teach civil rights in Louisiana. That was the name of our teacher institute. That thankfully we were successfully funded, and we taught civil rights in Louisiana. And what struck me about that was how many teachers, white and Black teachers, had not just didn't know about what Grambling or what Northern Louisiana, its contributions, or the role that it played in the civil rights movement, but also the level of backlash. Uh, 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 and so that's when I again began to get very, very interested in it. And then, I mean, again, in Black studies, but looking at Black studies really through the lens of civil rights and Black power. And once you do that, it becomes all Black studies. It becomes Black studies in so many different ways, in art, in photography, and literature and poetry, and in media. It really became so 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 I guess, so my 2 projects now, the ones that are at the top most of my mind, and I've got like 7 projects, but the one that is at the top of my mind, I think, even though I live in Kentucky, it's kind of the same idea, which is like, well, how does this how does this these series of laws, and these series of laws after Reconstruction and throughout the last 100 years, 120 years, how do they affect Black people? That same question. And so that's when I got interested in racial violence in Kentucky. But I also have to say, I think I first was interested in it in Louisiana. But it so that's kind of my long term goal, is to also have a racial violence project, racial violence in Louisiana. But right now, my institution has been very generous in funding this project on racial violence in Kentucky. Um, and from that project came another side project about cataloging all the Jim Crow laws in
Mhm.
Kentucky. Now, again, had I stayed in Louisiana, I probably would have taken up those projects in Louisiana, but just the academic winds blew me or into Kentucky. But it's still these sort of big questions of like, how does racial violence affect the way people and Black people have how did it affect the way Black people engaged in the world, and how did Jim Crow laws, how many were there, and how did those laws affect African Americans, but also like how do African Americans resist those laws? Those are big questions, but that's where I am. That's what I do. Uh, and then there's the Afro Turks thing, and again, it's the same thing. Like, how does this affect Black people? So I had a Fulbright to Turkey in 2014, and I happened to meet a Black woman, Phaedra Gwynn, a Black woman who was at the time a cultural attaché for the State Department, and she was in Turkey, and she had approved a number of grants for the Afro Turks, and I remember having lunch with her one day because the Fulbright program is a State Department program.
Mhm.
And I remember asking her, and she asked me if I knew anything about the Afro Turks, and I said, "Oh my goodness, no, I've never heard of the Afro Turks." And she said, "Yes, the Ottoman Empire had a thriving slave trade through Central Africa." Now, of course, in the United States, our focus is on the Atlantic slave trade, but there were several other slave trades,
Mhm.
and the one that the Ottomans conducted was through Central Africa. What right now would be again like Central African Republic, uh, 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 Sudan, South Sudan, and hooking over to the east. So like Kenya and so forth, but mostly like Egypt, Central Africa, and and she told me that there are descendants of people who were enslaved, living in Turkey who are black people, black Turkish people, who are the descendants of enslaved people from the Ottoman Empire, and that they were trying to get their stories told as well.
Mhm.
So I said, "What? That's crazy." So she set up a meeting between me and the leader of the Afro Turks at the time. He has since passed, but his name is Mustafa Olpak. He had written a memoir about what it was like to be a Black family living in Turkey and in his life in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And he asked me to publish his memoir. So that's what I'm working on now is publishing his memoir as well as yeah. So I'd like another project. Yeah. I got to limit my projects. No more new projects.
They're also fascinating, though.
Oh,
So
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Because that project, led to an Afro-Turk oral history project. That's what I mean. Like these projects have a way of fornicating and and like producing cute little children. And I want to take care of the children, but I'm like, I can't do it. I'm running out of time and I'm running out of money. So we have to say no more new projects. So the Afro-Turk project, the oral history project, that is something that I'm working on that this summer. And very simply, again, and that's a Black Studies project that has nothing to do. I mean, not nothing to do, but I honestly don't apply consciously my historian's lens to it. What I did is that I was able to assemble a team using some grant money from the NEH, and uh, uh, I went to Turkey. We got the team together, and we interviewed and we did oral histories of Afro Turks. And with the help of AI, what I can do is now turn those interviews that were conducted entirely in Turkish, turn them into Turkish transcripts and English transcripts, and also post those transcripts online. And also I took a lot of photographs while I was there, and post those photographs online as well, and hopefully make a type of making some type of book or some type of collection of their stories. Yeah. So no more new projects for another 5 years.
So how do you think that that Black Studies informs your work as a teacher?
Oh wow. I think that now I when I look at Black studies, or when I look at my work as a historian, I now say to my students, history is one path to understanding Black studies, but it's not the only path. And I really do try to make space for other ways of looking at a particular event through the lens of Black studies. And I think a really good example of that, at least for me right now, is like looking at it's talking about critical race theory,
Mm,
which is, as we know, is a legal theory. It's a theory that is taught in law schools, and yet even here in Rochester, I have met elementary school teachers who are wary about critical race theories. They say that we don't teach critical race theory in our classrooms in Rochester, and I'm like, yes, I agree with you. You do not teach critical race theory because saying that Martin Luther King was concerned about racial inequality, that is not critical race theory. That's like a statement of fact.
yeah.
So, like, really, really, I had this conversation with an actual, like a first grade teacher, and she was very concerned about critical race theory making its way into her classroom. And I said, teaching Ugh. Teaching your children about the importance of Frederick Douglass and how he started off life enslaved, but also became one of the most important American voices of the 19th century. That is not critical race theory.
Yeah.
Like asking your students to color in Frederick Douglass and his afro.
Oh,
That's not critical race theory.
no.
No. So but I went off on that just to say this, just to say that I now say to students, uh, if you wanna really sort of understand the richness of Black studies, you have to look at the law. You have to talk to your law student. Um your friends in law school. Maybe take a class at the law school about race and critical race theories. You have to look at, honestly, you have to look at Beyonce and and how she was able to achieve, this incredible feat. She is a Black woman who recorded a country music album, but and in that was able to draw our attention to the African American roots of country music. You have to be able to look at that. You have to be able to look at things that we, not things that are often deemed kind of frivolous. But then I guess what I'm thinking about is like the fashion industry, but because sometimes it can appear to be sort of vacuous and frivolous, and yet there's a strong and rich Black studies component
Yeah.
to fashion as well. I was going to say history. That again, that's my like. There's a strong and rich history of Black people in fashion as well. But no. There's also a Black studies component to this as well. There's really, if you are interested in Blackness, be it Black is Beautiful or I Am Somebody or the history, you can embrace Black studies in a lot of different ways. And I'm leaving out things like engineering and finance, but you can also do that too.
Yeah.
You can also approach Black studies that way, or use Black studies to approach your finance degree, your communications degree, your engineering degree. Yeah.
Yeah. I had my GA one semester was getting her PhD in mechanical engineering,
Mhm.
and she was approaching it from a Black studies perspective, and it was fast. Like, I was so fascinated by her. She was amazing. GA. Like
Wow.
I so appreciated her. But just she emailed me when she applied for the
Mhm,
job and she was like, I'm gonna tell you why it makes sense. This
mhm.
is why it makes sense, even though I'm over there in engineering. And she was right. She made perfect sense.
Yeah.
Um, and it was really interesting having that perspective, having such a technical background, but
Mhm.
taking Black studies and thinking about how do we utilize the field of engineering to positively impact Black people, or how do we
That's right.
minimize the harm that engineering is causing
That's
on
right.
Black people and Black communities in certain ways. So yeah.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Absolutely. Look, I don't wanna betray any confidences, but yeah, but I would love to I would love to hear more about, like, how she applies. She uses mechanical engineering and its practical applications, to, like, help Black people. I would love to hear that, because I think that that's also something that, uh, students are being led astray.
Yeah.
Um, you know, um the Washington Post did a story, I would say about 4 weeks ago, maybe more, around graduation time about, like, which degrees will produce money, and which degrees won't. And, of course, the wink wink of it was like a philosophy degree or an English degree or a Black studies degree is not gonna produce any money, but, a STEM degree will, an engineering degree will. And I think that that really does a disservice, A, to the humanities, but also does a disservice to students who are incredibly creative at
Mhm.
using the tools that they have to think about these disciplines differently. Yes, of course, you can be a dual major in Black Studies and engineering. Of course, you can. You can use engineering. Think about engineering in ways like you just said to help Black people, or at least to minimize the harm to Black people by building better, better, like, well crafted buildings that don't collapse during an earthquake, for example,
Yeah.
or building water systems that mean that equally distribute sort of water and other resources, and don't leave Black people, like, at the end where they get the nasty water, or you know what I mean, or where they get the water that's polluted. Yeah, you can use environmentalism in Black studies. You can use finances in Black studies, studying banks and studying investment. You can do all of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. Oh,
Absolutely.
yeah.
So,
Uh-huh.
2 specific questions left, and then I will
Yeah.
give you back some of your time on this hot summer day.
Oh, that's okay.
So, what
Uh-huh.
interests you most about the past of Black studies?
Good.
Um, and you can talk about it in critical and excited senses if you would like.
I really sorry, there's a cat hair on my eyeball. Um, I really I was thinking about this question earlier. One of the things that makes me very excited about the future is how uh, the students that I teach are really going to use Black studies in ways that I cannot conceive of. But that and that maybe that's a question that's like the next question. But um, that helps me springboard to looking at the work that uh, previous scholars did, and I'm just really amazed. I'm constantly amazed by the work that uh previous scholars have done. Like, and I say previous scholars, I mean all the work that all the Black studies professors have done to that, like in their individual research, right?
Mhm.
But also their administrative labor to keep Black studies as part of the institution, to institutionalize it. And I think, as your previous guest said, Jarvis Givens, a lot of those Black studies departments were led by Black women. As like meaning not necessarily with women who had an ideological agenda, but really wanted Black studies to be part of the institution. as not just as a program, but as a department, a degree granting department, and all the administrative work, all the meetings you got to go to, all the freaking forms you got to fill out, all the different, glad handing you have to do with deans and associate deans and DGSs and this, that, and DUSs, all that stuff you have to do just to keep Black studies afloat. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm amazed by that work. Uh, because it's so hard. And you have to do it for so long, and it's so stressful. But it's and it's a work that's often not recognized. Um, so that's that the administrative stuff excites me, but also really how people do it. But I'm really excited about in a very how do I say it, in a very kind of paradoxical way. I think that what excites me even now is that, especially now, because in a few days, the country will be celebrating its 250th anniversary of the signing of Declaration of Independence, even though this episode won't air until a few weeks later. I'm really excited about how people are talking about this moment in American history, and how they don't, and how if you go to certain media outlets, how they just don't talk about slavery, and they just don't talk about Jim Crow.
Yeah.
Um, um, they just choose not to do it. And so the paradox is this. I feel like I will always have a job in Black studies, because here's the salt and the sugar. The more the country doesn't want to talk about it, the more Black studies professors and scholars say, "Oh no, we have to talk about it." Meaning, the more um, somebody, a national pundit says that slavery and Jim Crow and Black studies don't matter, the more Black studies professors say, "Oh yes, it does matter, and here are all the reasons why." So that's the salt and the sugar. That's how this situation. I think that's what excites me about the future, because now, I mean, myself and my students will be able to use these tools like AI to show exactly how Jim Crow, slavery, and Black studies matter. We have these new tools to refute that same old tired argument. And so, just very specifically, even though I said no more new projects, that's how I slam my fist, no more new projects. But that's how I got to the question of cataloging Jim Crow laws, because the idea came to me, I think, in 2023, really, and it was inspired by a project out of North Carolina called On the Books, um, Jim Crow and the Algorithm of Resistance. Um, it is still extant, and I think that you can still find it. I was looking at that project because that project too was cataloging all the Jim Crow laws in North Carolina. But what the difference between 2023 and 2024 is AI.
Mm-hmm.
So what excites me now is that I was able to turn to my interns. I was able to turn to computer science students and say, "Can you build for me an AI, a large language model that can find all the Jim Crow laws in Kentucky?" And they said yes. And that's what we've been working on. And why is that? And why is that so important? And this is why it excites me, right? Because as an educator, I'm talking about Jim Crow this and laws that and shaking my fist. And then I go to the internet and I say, and I ask the internet, or I type into Google, how many Jim Crow laws were there in Kentucky? And honestly, if you do this now, the answer is, I don't know. Really, really. And I said, what? And then really, I would type into Louisiana. I was like, how many Jim Crow laws were there in Louisiana? And the internet will say, I don't know. Really, really. And I'm not surprised by that. So that's where I saw the need. I saw the space where, like, if I want to be able to tell my students that that Kentucky had um 300 Jim Crow laws, which or Kentucky had a number of laws governing the interaction of blacks and whites, and I can point to one in specific. I want to be able to do that, and I want to be able to produce the receipts, and
Mhm.
that's where the AI model comes in. The AI model is able to do it strangely enough. I can hire graduate students to do it, and we can go through all the Kentucky statutes, page by page by page. Or we can find Kentucky. We can find, thankfully online, all of the Kentucky statutes. Honestly, all of the Kentucky statutes have been printed online, and they've been fed into the AI model, and the AI model is now finding the Jim Crow laws.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And it shows, again, this is what excites me about the future, because it excites me about the past. And it shows that Jim Crow is everywhere. Jim Crow is everywhere.
Yeah.
It really is. I have this list of things I was going to say. Well, so I'll just say it. You know, every time, well, slavery is everywhere. Every time you reach into your purse and pull out a 20, you're looking at a picture of a slave owner.
Yep.
Every time, uh, not you, Ashley, but every time someone crosses the threshold of Georgetown University to go into its to take its classes there, they're looking at a university that was saved by slavery. Every time you cross, uh, from the every time you cross, you live in like an urban area, like I'm going to use me. Every time I move, my parents' house is in central Rochester. Every time I go into a suburb, which are very closely related to Rochester. In fact, it's Greater Rochester. But every time I go, I'm looking at Jim Crow, because that's where the white flight was. Every time. Every time. Um, I wrote this down. Every time you look at an episode of the Golden Girls, and I actually taught a class on the Golden Girls. Every time you look at an episode of the Golden Girls, and there are two episodes in specifically, you're looking at Jim Crow. You're looking at racial segregation. There's one episode of Jim Crow in which, there's one episode of the Golden Girls, and I love the Golden Girls. I'll probably go on a Golden Girls themed cruise eventually. But there are two episodes that stand out. One in which Blanche is visited by her mammy, and she's literally called her mammy, played by the actress Ruby Dee, great actress Ruby Dee. Um, uh, and Vance is visited by her mammy, and it's through the course of their conversation that they find out a huge family secret related to Blanche's mammy. But the thing about it is that they talk about this relationship between Blanche and her mammy without actually talking about Jim Crow, even though Jim Crow is right there. It's right there.
Yeah.
It's right there. There's another episode that's even more blatant. Dorothy's son, Michael, is
Mhm.
marrying a much older woman, Lorraine. And Lorraine, Michael's a saxophonist, and Lorraine is the singer for the jazz band, and they're gonna get married. And Dorothy opposes it because he's so young, and Lorraine's family opposes it because he's a scuzzy white boy. Whatever. But there's a point in that episode in which Rose and Blanche come out in blackface. That's
Yeah.
Jim Crow. Like, and I'd seen that episode 100 times, and then it just hit me like, wait a minute, that's something from the slavery and Jim Crow era. Jim Crow and slavery are everywhere, and I think that's why I think I will always have a job. I think that, knock on wood. I think that it's because, as again, to go back to that idea, the more people try to deny that race doesn't play, or racism doesn't play a role in American politics or American culture, all of these Black studies departments and professors and scholars say, oh, yes, it does. And here's all the ways. Here's all the ways it does. So it's almost like it's almost like saying the more the more sort of American history says we that racism or race has not played a significant role in the building of the country. There are all these scholars like you and your department and lots of other departments who produce the receipts and say A, B, C, D. So that conversation will be going on for long after I retire. Long after you retire, and you've got like another 50 years in this game.
Hope not. I
Okay.
hope I'm not working for the next 50 years.
I
At
hope
some
so
point,
too,
I would
Ashley.
like to retire, but
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you got to get the book to college.
yeah,
uh,
yeah.
yeah. So, so that's what, and so that, and what excites me most about the past of Black studies, it's that there's just so the more tools, technological tools we develop, the more we realize just how rich the history of Black studies and the history of Black resistance is. The more we realize it. I think a specific example I would give is again very specific that your listeners will probably hear, and it's the Tuskegee Institute news clippings file, which is the best document of Black life, all of Black life, between like 1890 and 1960. I don't know that the Tuskegee, I don't think it's been digitized yet. Yet. That's another project that I do not want to take on. But once somebody digitizes that project, they are going to see how all of these Black newspapers, like 100 Black newspapers from all across the country, catalog Black life. Cataloged everything from bridal announcements or wedding announcements to this person is playing at this club later that night to the legal challenges, yes, and to the lynching and racial violence, and to the literature that's being produced and the music and the and all of it and even more. That I think that's one of the things that I really look forward to using at in maybe 4 or 5 years when someone takes up the project, because I will not, of digitizing the Tuskegee Institute news clippings file. That's what excites me about it. Just to hear that Black people fought back and fought back in creative ways. And very optimistic ways, fought back against racism and systemic racism and racial segregation and slavery, and very creative, and eye-popping ways. Yeah, yeah. So that's what I look forward to.
Thank you so much. I think that that
It
is
was
a good place. Is there anything you would like to add?
no. I think I've talked too much. I've talked too much.
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you
Oh,
so
thank
much
you.
again for being here.